Hey, this is Brodor. Once again, this episode was recorded prior to Cancellation Fest 2020. Hopefully we'll still have some semblance of a convention season, or at least maybe a con to go to before the end of the year, but who knows. Hope you enjoy the episode. I'm Brodor, and this is Why We Game. Today, my guest is Mike Richie. Mike Richie is with Rather Dashing Games. Mike, what the hell is Rather Dashing?
Rather Dashing it started almost as a joke. We were coming up with names for our game company we wanted to start. And there was a friend of mine at the time, and we were sitting back and we were saying, what do we want to represent in the game industry? And we came up with, as a lot of starting businesses do, we came up with, a dozen titles or more. And Rather Dashing actually came out as a joke. And then we said, wait a sec. That's exactly what we want. We want something playful. We want something whimsical, but we want that comfortable, elegant, yet whimsical, not quite steampunk, but the optimistic future, but tied to the past feeling. So Rather Dashing was born. And then our logo came directly as a offshoot of that mentality. And the logo was a very cartoony representation of my grandfather who raced.
So the sort of steampunk inventor guy with the big mustache that I'm looking at, that is based on your grandfather?
Yes, very, very, very loosely.
Right on.
He was a C-17 pilot during World War II. Then he ended up raising me. He took over my Boy Scout troop, and he was the guy that all my friends and I wanted to sit around the campfire and hear the cool story. I mean, I grew up with the Gandalf pilot wizard, and it was awesome. So I'm trying to live up to the legacy he left me, and so I thought that was the best way to do it.
Very, very touching. Let's take a step back in time to you as a kid. Mike, how did you get into the tabletop gaming hobby? And what was your first attraction? What was the thing that, like, I often describe that I don't know why I like girls. I just knew that when I was a kid, there was a cartoon called Mask, and there was a red-headed villain, and I was like, that chick's in my wheelhouse. I don't know why, but she is, right? What attracted you to this hobby in the first place?
Before that, for the record, I ended up marrying the red-headed villain. So
from Mask?
So I can totally but I've got the redheaded, consumes the souls of others, beautiful way for a wife.
Well, that's fantastic. I too am married to a pale redhead. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, see, we're the lucky ones.
Yeah, amen.
So what got me, I would say my grandparents, again, go back to that, they did not plan on raising a child at their age, but circumstances dictated that, and they did an amazing job, so they bought board games. And granted, a lot back then, the hobby industry was not as hobbyish as it is now, so a lot of these were, there was a Pac-Man board game, there was a Knight Rider board game, there was the old Fireball Island. I played the heck out of all these kinds of games. Trivial Pursuit, all age-appropriate stuff. And that started me on board games. And then I was about 13. I played my first D&D game. Yeah, so I proudly rolled out a Dwarven Paladin and quickly realized how hard it was to play a Paladin.
Mike, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 44.
44. Okay. See that I thought we were very close in age. I'm 45, and the interesting thing to me about this hobby is that I think generationally it draws very important distinctions between groups of gamers depending on what generation in which they grew up and what adversity that they had to deal with, right? Now, I'm not making any conflation that being a gamer is like being an oppressed class, but if you meet people who are gamers who are in their 40s or older, it was a different experience as a kid than it is today.
And I can cite that so many ways. Like my friend had this about 5 years ago to give placement. My friend's kid was a senior in high school, and they were able to form, the extracurricular groups, the chess club and things like that. So he decided he was going to do a D&D group. Mm-hmm. And he came home from school that day, and all of our family shot for dinner. I was like, hey, how'd it go? He's like, we had to split it into like 3 groups. We had so many people signing up to play D&D. He's like, we had like 5 cheerleaders sign up. And I'm like, my generation got stuffed in lockers for you, boy. You better appreciate that.
You know, it's again, and not to conflate it to other trials and tribulations that people actually suffered, but yeah, I mean, right. you either had to learn to keep your mouth shut or learn to defend yourself because people picked on you for being into this stuff.
Pretty much, yeah. And then, but fortunately, I was surrounded with friends who were also into it.
I was very lucky as well, but it's not about my experience. So you're doing some basic board games with your grandparents. May I ask, if it's not too personal, and if it is, you tell me to fuck off. But what my best friend as a child, my buddy Travis, and Travis lived next door to me. And he lived with his grandparents through some circumstances that happened with his bio mom and dad. How did you come to, if you don't mind talking about it, how did you come to live with your grandparents?
I don't mind at all. Because it happened when I was 2.5. So my biological father was not a good person. He suffered from severe alcohol and abusive issues, and one thing led to another, and then my parents got divorced. My mother's a good person, but she kind of had an emotional rough time with it. Mm-hmm. And so my grandparents said, look, let Michael stay here. And so I pretty much grew up with two mothers and then my grandfather. So it's pretty darn cool. So everyone thinks that I do come from a divorced family, but sure. I didn't suffer any of those consequences that a lot of kids do. I had an amazing childhood. And I attribute the fact to my mother, my grandmother, and my grandfather pulling together to make that for me.
So your grandparents went out, and did they have a penchant for gaming? Did grandma or grandpa really dig this stuff, or they were just looking for a way to connect with you?
I think a little of both, because while they went out and bought what was new, for me, they had, I still have it. They've got a copy of the original Booby Trap, that spring-loaded thing where you pull the slats out.
Oh, sure.
Out. Yeah. I had the original one from 1956 because they had it in their library. So I think I wouldn't call them gamers as much as people in the Victorian era played bridge after dinner. So
yeah, they were parlor folk.
Exactly. Yeah. Because that was kind of the generational thing.
That's absolutely wild. All right, so you're doing basic board games. You discover Dungeons and Dragons. Was there somebody in your life at school that introduced you to D&D, or is that something that you discovered on your own?
So I grew up with a kind of insular group of friends. We all went to church together. We all were in Boy Scouts together, and one of my friends just took me to another friend's house, and they were playing D&D, and I was like, what's this? And then some other friends were playing some Palladium games, Heroes Unlimited, I think it was back then.
Right, you immediately stopped being friends with those guys?
No, I led them to a better day.
You got them away from, I generally try not to shit on people professionally in this industry because it's bad for my brand, but, Kevin Sembieta, that's one I'll take a dump on. Beyond
D&D, one of the first things I did play was I played a lot of Rifts. Actually, the conversation was going to go in this direction anyway because I played D&D and I played Rifts with some friends, some very close friends. Several have gone into the game industry in various ways. We loved the concept because we're 15, 16. We don't know what we're doing. We loved the concept of Rifts. This post-apocalyptic future where there's magic and there's technology and there's all this stuff, and obviously we hadn't heard of Shadowrun. So we really gravitated towards the idea of Rifts. But as we got to later teens, we'd rewritten half the rules.
Have you always gravitated toward mechanics and design?
Always. Are you familiar with the Belgariad?
No.
High fantasy series from the 80s. So
okay. I should. It sounds like I should be.
Yeah. It was relatively popular back in the day, and we made a Risk board to play Risk in that world. We did it for Lord of the Rings. We did it for Star Trek. Before these games existed, we were taking existing things like Nuclear War or Risk and designing our own boards in the worlds that we loved.
Wait a minute, like the old Rick Loomis Flying Buffalo Nuclear War?
Yeah, that one.
Oh, God, I fucking loved that game when I was a kid. In high school. Well,
my friend's older brother was in the Army at the time, so he swapped out all of the components with live rounds of ammo to look like different warheads. So everything from little 22s up to 223, all out on this board.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I know. Probably not the safest or most PC thing to say, but it was kind of funny for us at being 15 and 16.
Yeah, no.
We were redesigning stuff. Do you remember how when Transformers, the old Transformers, had the stat bar in the back they just look at through the red lens?
Oh, sure.
We used those as characters and made up a combat system.
So are you familiar with a role-playing game podcast called Fear the Boot?
I've heard of it. I've listened to it a little bit, but not much.
So Dan Repperger, who's one of the original hosts, probably the original guy on the show, Dan actually has run at multiple conventions a role-playing game based exactly on that, those stat cards and deriving mechanics from those stat cards.
Great mind.
Yeah, no, right? Yeah, exactly right. All right. So you're into gaming, you're into design. What was your first actual industry gig? Was it you breaking out on your own and forming your own company and doing your own game design, or have you worked for other publishing houses or other companies?
Yes to all those questions.
Okay. All right. So you're walking through the door day one as a professional. What does that look like?
So a little backstory on that then. Designing my first game, it was what I call, and I'm trying to coin this term because it's not used much, but I think it really fits. I'm trying to coin the term thematic abstract. Okay. And people go, "What's thematic abstract?" Then I'll explain. They're like, "Oh yeah, that kind of is the thing." So I designed what I call a thematic abstract back before there were thematic abstracts. In my opinion, thematic abstract is something that a lot of people are playing, but they don't know that it's its own genre. They'll either just call it a board game or they'll call it an abstract game when it's really neither. The game I designed, Elements, it's an abstract game. It's got aspects of Go, chess, and checkers, but it's painted against the backdrop of you're drawing stones that represent fire, water, earth, and wind, and they each have their different powers and abilities. It's abstract, but there's lore and there's a theme. And there's a lot of these games out right now. There's Onitama, there's War Chest, there's Santorini. Gosh, I could go on, but
Well, and you've named,
blanks, of course.
Yeah, I mean, and you've named, some just right there, just a few really, really solid games.
Oh, Azul. These all are solid games. They are far more abstract than board games, but there's a story. You feel like you're transported to an era in time. You feel like you're a military commander. You feel like you're in a story. So I was calling those thematic abstracts just because that's what I thought they were, and I would kind of use this term with people. Once they explain it, they're like, "Oh yeah, that kind of is its own emergent genre that I'm seeing more and more of each year."
It makes a lot of sense. War Chest was one that I was like, Jesus Christ, this game is chess but fun.
Yeah, that's a shorter way of putting it. Chess but fun.
Yeah, because I mean, and again, I don't have the kind of brain to plot out ahead and be good at a game like chess, but because I'm just a reactionary thinker, I always have been. But the idea that I can play a chess-style game and still build a narrative because it has a solid theme, I think is a very good point. How much of when you're doing game design then with the concept of thematic abstract, how much of your game design process is theme versus mechanic? Do you try to blend the two, or do you just sometimes shove peanut butter into chocolate where you've got a mechanic idea and then you skin it with different themes to figure out what works?
I've done both. Genuinely, it's the natural world or history or something that inspires me to take a specific game mechanic and see if it can be nurtured into something that fits that concept.
Is that what happened with Element?
That's absolutely what happened with Element. I've always been fascinated with ancient history. I've been fascinated with folklore. And at the time I was watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it all rolled in. And there are a lot of inspirational points. But I have played, I'm not good at chess, and I'm not good at Go, but I enjoy the history of both of them. And so all of that had an influence. I'm like, I'm going to be a millionaire because I designed a game, like everyone is at first. And I had a friend who owned a toy store. We got my wife and I badges to go to New York Toy Fair. So it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I've never been to Toy Fair. I've heard many stories, but it's enormous, right?
It's the entire Javits Center. So, I mean, it's measured in like 20 plus acres. It's huge. And of course it was like drinking from a fire hose because this was literally my first attempt at anything professional. But lo and behold, I actually got a company to sign the game. And I designed kind of freelance for them for a while until their company was going more in an action sports direction. And that's when I started Rather Dashing. And in the meantime, Rather Dashing has changed hands because it's a bigger company than I want to own by myself. It's changed hands a couple times. Now it's owned by Lauren Coleman, who also owns Catalyst Game Labs. That's my primary job, but I also do freelancing on the side for non-competing types of IPs.
So when you say non-competing types of IPs, does that prohibit you from doing board game design?
No, not at all. In fact, I do. So pretty much what it is since Lauren owns, Rather Dashing, it's a courtesy for me to bring, and he also owns Catalyst.
Right.
And his son owns Cat Dragon, and Lauren owns Redshift. To me, it's a courtesy to bring him my designs first. And he'll say, you know what, I love this game. It doesn't fit any of our 4 design houses over the next 2 years. Go sell it and make some money.
I know I have a tendency to ramble and become, extremely tangential, so I don't want to do that. But
that's because you're a gamer.
Yeah. that in and of itself is an interesting point. But let me get us back on track. So you go to Toy Fair, you get somebody to sign your game, and then you start Rather Dashing. Now that alone could be its own episode, just talking about the formation of the company and building the brand. But the interesting thing to me about that subject that is topical is the convention circuit. The convention season for this year seems like it's pretty much dead with the announcement of Gen Con's cancellation. 2 facets of income for the game company. One, you're doing sales through the traditional 3-tier distribution system, distributor, game store, and consumer. You're also doing cons. So how is the absence of a con season going to affect Rather Dashing?
I won't lie, it'll hurt. It's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt everybody. So I'm a very firm believer that when the tide rises, all ships should rise together. So that's one of the things I like about the game industry, and I could go tangential on that. That means when the tide lowers, it's going to lower for everybody. So everyone's seeing a hit, but there's also opportunities. There's opportunities to to find new avenues for sales, to try to change the kind of product you're making, maybe find a market that could work regardless of a pandemic, and new products. Like we switched gears a little, and we're about to launch 3 puzzles. We've never made a puzzle before. It's going to hurt, but I'm hoping that most people will be able to last the year.
I am as well. I mean, for me, I'm in a situation where I'm very, very lucky, but living in the St. Louis area, I'm a glut for choice when it comes to game stores, but I'm working on a blog article right now. I just got off the phone this morning with a guy who does some business here locally, and I won't waste your time with it. But, yeah, I mean, the impression that I'm getting is that unless an FLGS or a company does some healthy online sales, brick and mortar sales, obviously things are starting to open up, but it's still been very, very ugly for a lot of people. And I'm concerned to see how many of these game stores, particularly the traditional card shops that aren't able to do organized play right now, how long they're going to be able to sustain this.
Agreed. I think it will hit the FLGSs more than actually the publishers. I'm not a store owner, so I can't speak with too much authority to that. But I have seen, a lot of companies, especially in Gamma, are trying to help. Like either we're offering discounts through the retailers because they're still doing curbside, or I know Wizards of the Coast has mixed up things with Magic and how they do offer payment and all some different strategies. So it seems, obviously there's going to be an exception to every rule, but it seems like for the most part, we're all on this island together going, okay, we're going to be here a while. You make a fire. You get some water. You put a big SOS in the sand. Like everyone's trying to do their part and work together so we can all at least, if not survive till we can thrive.
That's interesting. The gaming industry, as you pointed out, I've always used the word because it's titillating. I've always said incestuous. It really, really is an incestuous industry. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean in general, it's a conundrum. The game industry is at one time larger than people expect. There's a lot more money in it than people expect. But then, it's a lot smaller. I mean, everybody knows everybody. And this is why, frankly, for me, for this new profession, I'm scared shitless for 2 reasons. One, I'm a technophobe. And 2, I don't want to alienate people, right? I don't want to get to a point where I've burned bridges inside the industry because it's small enough that could just fucking kill me.
Yeah, and that has been an issue for some people in the past where they said the wrong thing to the wrong group and they tried to get the barn burned down, and but I don't think most people think that way. I think whatever side of the political, religious, whatever spectrum you're on, I believe the people that want to hurt other people is actually very small. They get the most press because they're the loudest and they make good news, but I think most people genuinely want to see other people succeed as well as themselves.
If you don't mind answering, and again, if the figures, if the actual stats are none of my business, I totally get it. But in terms of gross sales annually, what kind of sales loss are you going to see for your company by not having your booth at Gen Con?
I don't have the authority to give actual numbers because it's not my company. But
understood.
I would definitely say between, let's say Origins cancels in the fall, right, as well, and Gen Con is canceled.
Yep.
That's a good, for a company rather dashing size, that's going to be a good, 30% of our revenue for the year.
That estimate frightens me because most businesses in this country, when they're turning a profit, their profit margins are between 4 and 8%. So if you're losing 30% of your gross because of one 4-day convention, that is challenging. So I can see while you're pivoting and you're starting to do things like puzzles. But it's interesting. I noticed that you said you're doing 3 new puzzles. You've not done puzzles before. What about game releases? Without having most of con season, has this caused Rather Dashing to alter its release schedule? Excuse me. Has this caused Rather Dashing? It has? Okay. What does that look like then?
Rather Dashing makes a lot of games that the type of game we try to make, I call them bridge games. I don't like the term filler because filler is a very different term for very different people. We make games that a deep hobbyist will sit down and play with a mom and 2 kids, and everyone will walk away with a good experience. For the hardline gamer, maybe it's a little light, but it was still engaging. Mm-hmm. And for the casual gamers, like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is a whole new world. Case in point was when we released a co-op dungeon crawler a few years ago called Awakening Lair. When we were test playing in local game cafes, and I looked over, and there were 6 people playing. 2 of them had just ended their hardline Pathfinders night, had just won a Magic tournament, and then it was a mom and her 2 kids playing this game. And they're all having fun. They're all engaging. The premise is I try to make games like that. So I wanted to kind of lay that out and say how that's going to affect what we switch with Rather Dashing. We have another dungeon crawl called Waking Lair of the Dark Forest. It's a sequel to that game. We've put that on hold because it's the type of game that you need to sit down and show people. It's a hobby. It's very much a hobby industry sell. So we want to be able to show it off at a place like Origins or Gen Con, thing like that. So the game is, with the exception of the cover, the game is quite literally done. The quote requests have been made. I mean, I could just pull the trigger and get this going, but we're holding off on it because of convention season. What we're doing instead is moving into a few branded things. Now, there's one I'm about to sign a contract on, so I can't say what it is, but the other one, we're actually going to design a game for Downton Abbey, which I don't know if you're familiar with or not.
I have never seen it, but I am familiar with the phenomenon.
So it's a intellectual property that we went after, and it's going well. And the game's really, really cool. A little bit different than what Rather Dashing would normally design, but there's a market for it, even in a global pandemic.
If you will indulge me a moment, it sounds to me that your approach to game design is almost like pop music. I don't mean that to sound denigrating. I think Taylor Swift is a fucking genius. I think that the ability to make music that has a broad appeal like that is tremendously challenging. So for you to be able to make games that are both attractive to the veteran and the uninitiated, that's a hell of a feat.
Thank you. Why would I need to forgive you for that kind of compliment?
Because people shit on pop music, right? They think that because it's this sort of, silly, catchy bubblegum stuff that it doesn't have value, and I just disagree wholeheartedly. And so, so for me to refer to your games as pop music, I truly mean that as a compliment.
I understand that. And I'm one of those people that thinks every specific genre has produced its greats and its garbage. So...
Isn't that fucking true of this industry, right? I mean, Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying anything profound. It's just like anything else. But God, is there a better time in life to be a gamer? I mean, if you look back on your 44 years and you look back at your participation in the hobby and how the hobby has evolved, can you think of a better time than today to be a gamer?
With accessibility, no. I'm excited that we've got a lot more demographics playing. We've got a much wider age range playing. So ostensibly, no. But are those bittersweet moments where I miss being in my geeky, dimly lit, magic shop and everyone's cheering because someone pulled the Lord of the Pit out of their foil pack?
Oh, yeah. No, I hear you. I miss being in high school and playing 40K on the floor of my basement for, an entire weekend, ignoring my homework. Yeah, I miss that for sure. I really do. But the thing I miss most about it, when we were young, it was a special secret thing. It was sort of like when I and I'm going to sound like a douche hipster, but it was like when I discovered the Black Keys and most people hadn't heard of them, right? I was like, these guys are really great. And then they don't stop being good. They just become a popular, well-known thing. And I don't know, it's as lame as it sounds, it loses something. It's no longer mine.
Well, there's also a bittersweet thing that comes in every quest. And as gamers, we should understand the concept of the quest. The quest is something that you go for. You pour your heart and soul and your resources towards. And, once you've thrown that ring in that volcano, as much as important as that was, it's like, now what? And I think that applied to us as like, we've all spent our lives, yours and my generation, I should say, spent our lives trying to find acceptance with gaming and stuff like that. And now we've got it. And I think the benefits far, far, far outweigh the negatives. So I don't want to be misquoted there. But there is going to be that bittersweet nostalgia. But to reinforce the fact that the amount of demographics, the accessibility of games, the fact that I can go do a Google search and find sensory-friendly games for children on the autistic spectrum. Like the fact that there's literally a game for every person out there. That does warm my heart.
What's next for Rather Dashing then, in terms of your game design and trying to move forward during the pandemic? What do you guys see business being like in 6 months?
In my opinion, that depends on whether or not there's a massive second spike. If there's not a massive second spike or if the scientists, which are around the world and actually working together, which is awesome to see, if there are some major medical breakthroughs in treatment or vaccination or what have you, if some of those things happen, then I think we're going to see life go back to a relative normal. I think people are going to be a little more cautious with things. I think people are, for the most part, going to love thy neighbor a little bit more because I think a lot of people got shaken with this, economically and personally and medically. If there's a massive second spike, then I think we might see more shutdowns, and I don't know what to predict at that point. So I'm very hopeful for the first option. I'm
terrified. My fantasy is that come October, when we get to the dates where they've rescheduled Origins, I have this fantasy, and I don't think it's unrealistic, for this year's Origins to sell out faster than any other year's Origins, because so many people are going to be bummed out about not having a Gen Con, and even if they have to go to a smaller show, it's still a kick-ass show.
Agreed. I think Origins is smaller by number. Obviously, it is a fact. It's smaller by number, but I think it still delivers just as rich of an experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not beholden to anyone save my reputation, so I don't mind saying this. I think Origins is a better show for gaming. Now, I know that there are people out there that have gone apoplectic hearing me say that, but I have had better experiences gaming at Origins, but I would rather go to Gen Con for the sense of, basically the great moot of the tribe, right? Tribe members from all over the world come to exchange in commerce and celebrate the hobby. I fucking love that. I've not had as good gaming experiences at Gen Con as I've had at Origins.
That makes sense. Origins and Gen Con have always been like Thanksgiving and Christmas. One follows the other relatively quickly. Everyone makes a big deal about Christmas. but Thanksgiving really kickstarts that Christmas season and is also very underrated of its own accord.
Well, I think that's a wonderful analogy, and to think this year, fuck, Christmas is canceled. All we have is Thanksgiving. And I'm going to go, and I'm going to...
2 turkeys.
Yeah, I am going to glut myself. I'm rolling out of this motherfucker. Do you have any long-term projects, Kickstarters, things like that are coming down the pike that we should be aware of?
The Downton Abbey project will be a Kickstarter.
Okay. When are you guys planning on launching that?
I would imagine, we will probably launch it probably early July.
Gotcha. And with Downton Abbey, if I may ask, is that iron still hot enough?
Well, yes. Downton Abbey just released a movie last year, and the movie did way better than what even they anticipated. It's essentially Masterpiece Theater, and they spent $13 million on it and made $191.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So it's definitely, and it fits very much in the Barnes & Noble crowd, those kinds of people. The game I designed, I did not design a deep hobby game for Downton Abbey. I designed a light, accessible parlor-style game for Downton Abbey. And there's another movie greenlit to come out.
I had no idea that it was that successful a franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So you brought up Barnes & Noble, and you brought up that the Downton Abbey game that you've designed is going to be a good parlor-style game for the big box stores. Are we going to see that game not just in Barnes & Noble, but in places like Target, Walmart?
Too soon to know.
Gotcha.
I'm hoping that it will still be in hobby, too, because first and foremost, I'm a hobbyist, and I want to see hobby survive. To me, Barnes & Noble is that kind of like hybrid. It's not quite a big box. It's not big box like Walmart or Target.
They're villainous carpetbaggers, but those are my words, not yours. So
but they're good to me. So
yeah, no. It's like, but they're not. And I guess I don't know. I mean, I hear you. They're good to you, and there is a portion of the population that has been exposed to this hobby because of those kinds of stores, and I have to give them their credit.
It's kind of like, Avatar: The Last Airbender is now on Netflix. We can be all hipstery, but, hey, at least you're watching Avatar now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. Because here's what's going to happen, right? People are going to go into Barnes & Noble's, and Barnes & Noble's not going to, the person who works there, very, very likely is not going to have played any of those games, let alone your specific game, and not have the ability to pitch that game to sell it. That's why I'm so concerned about convention season this year. You as a game designer and companies that you work for as game publishers, they're not going to see the public. So your reliance on brick and mortar retail now, you have to feel greater pressure than ever that somebody else is selling your product and you're not putting your product in front of people, and that retailers are. Would you be more comfortable with con season so you're presenting it directly?
I think they're all arrows in the quiver. I'm only one person, no matter how much I shout, no matter how cool my games are, no matter how much I put on social media. I'm only one guy, and I'm certainly not like, a global influencer or anything. So I think the more competent voices we have demoing games and showing games off, I'm all for it. I really am, because that's how we've gotten as far as we have gotten, and I think that trend's only going to continue.
Do you have plans for any kind of outreach in lieu of a convention season? Like, do you go to your locals, you said your local gaming cafes, with the world opening up, do you have any intention of just putting some product in the trunk and hitting the road and pressing the flesh?
We are talking, so like I said, we're part of something bigger because of Catalyst.
Right.
So I'm kind of coordinating with their efforts, and we're trying to, right now we've got like 5 different plans, and depending on how the world opens up, which one makes sense.
All right. So it's definitely something that you guys have been making contingencies for.
Yeah, it's on the forefront of all of our minds.
Yeah, because that to me is probably the most challenging thing about this industry, is that the farther removed you get from the designer of the game, the less passion that person has for selling the game as a general rule, unless you get one of those alpha gamers or champions. But with games, with game stores having limited hours and having essentially limiting the number of people that are allowed to be in the building, not having events, my concern is that products are not going to get the hype, the press, the PR that they need to be successful.
And I agree. That is definitely a problem, because those that have enough money to continue to either ride out or promote will do better than those that don't, but that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the quality of the game.
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean the big thing of it's just like films, right? If the writers strike and what that did to film and television, but larger studios, larger houses are able to survive. But I've got a couple local game stores in my area where I don't want to name them by name, but I'm concerned that they're not going to be able to weather the storm. I live in St. Louis, so we've got Miniature Market, which does a tremendous amount of business online, Collector's Store, which does a tremendous amount of business online, and for retailers, that seems to be the distinction, right? That some retailers that are doing online sales, in my experience, are doing better than they ever have.
You mentioned earlier champions. Rabbit Action's actually always had some decent champions. We've just never had enough, market penetration.
Right.
But our champions are our champions. And they've switched up. They're selling online and stuff, and they need more product, and that's a good sign.
What kind of distribution or restocking issues have you run into with all this going on?
Well, the biggest one was for a while that PSI stopped fulfilling orders to distributors, but that was okay because Diamond Alliance, ACD, they weren't really processing orders because they had to shut down too for a while. That's opening back up, and I'm actually talking to my distribution channels on how do we do a restock? How fast should we do a restock? Should we just do the hits? Should we do the oldies? Should we do a mix? Do you want a mixtape?
Well, that's interesting, and that's something that I personally haven't been exposed to. When distributor X wants to get more of, let's say, we need copies of Element, and this belongs in museum, and we come in peace, how do they place orders with you? Because as a retailer, contacting a distributor to order product, or even contacting a publisher directly. Dude, I get it. I've done it a ton. But what's that process look like from the distributor's point of view contacting you? How do order minimums work? How do pricing structures work?
It changes, because we offer different specials and different incentives at different times. But the general gist is that I work very closely with both my reps at PSI and my reps at all the major distributors, make sure we're all on the same pages. I don't really touch my inventory. PSI handles the bulk of that. And they say, let's take Alliance. Alliance will order so much product from PSI. I stay updated on our inventory reports and all of those. And I kind of try and keep my finger on the pulse of what's moving and try to figure out why, so I can try to move more of that and also try to move stuff that's not moving as much. Sometimes it's factors well beyond our control. Let's be honest, pandemic is going to outsell all of us these 3 months.
Oh, sure.
It's really just communication. I think the industry is catching up communication-wise to how other industries streamline their communication services.
All right, so I'm going to change gears here for a second. Do you prefer Mike or Michael?
People usually call me Mike when they're happy with me, and Michael when they're not happy with me. So it depends on your mood.
Right. Well, so every time we've spoken, I've always called you Mike, and here we are, many minutes in, and I probably should have asked you that question first and been a professional. But fuck, there you go.
No, you're fine. Mike is fine. I mostly go by Mike. The only time I really use Michael is when I sign my pen name for the books I write.
Okay, well, all right, hold on, because I was about to ask you about production. Let's take a step back. So you have a pseudonym as an author?
Well, Michael T. Richie, my actual legal name,
right?
Is the pen name as an author, yeah. Really?
I mean, forgive my ignorance. I had no idea that you were an author. Let's talk about that. So are we talking about erotic fiction? Like, you know, are we romance novel Fabio stuff, or what are we looking at?
Oh, that's a different pendant. No. I've got 3 novellas out, and they are steampunk. So I wanted to write something kind of steampunk Firefly-esque. I released a book with a writing partner named Grant back in 2015, and we never got around to continuing the series because I was busy with game stuff, and he moved on to television, and yada, yada, yada. And I expressed my interest in continuing to write, and Grant was like, please continue with my blessing. That's always been your main passion. So I've just, within the past few weeks, launched my own little tiny press called Frostfire and Ink.
Where would my listeners find that information?
If you go on to Facebook, like I said, I keep it really small because it's a side project.
Right.
If you go on Facebook and look up Frostfire and Ink, it'll be under Michael Richie, and that Facebook page has all the links that you can buy it on iTunes or Barnes & Noble or Amazon or a bunch of smaller press things as well. And you can get digital copies or hard copies.
So it's a steampunk fantasy. Is it action adventure? Is it sort of noir mystery?
It's I would mostly classify it as action adventure. It's got some gothic elements to it. I'm a big steampunk fan. I'm also a very big high fantasy fan, and I want to work in that genre too. But for the steampunk, my frustration with steampunk right now is that if I say science fiction, there's a bunch of places you can go. You can go to Battlestar Galactica, you can go to Star Trek, so on and so forth. If I say almost any genre, high fantasy, there's Lord of the Rings, there's Harry Potter, there's not that go-to for steampunk. I think the reason is no one ever made the full steampunk world. Like, I'm a big fan of the Newbery and Hobbes series, but it's steampunk Sherlock Holmes. They're amazing books, but everything always seems to tell a slice of steampunk rather than making an immersive world. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create a world that, yes, there's Tyrannosaurus Rexes roaming in the darkness of Amazon. Yes, there's Morlocks. Yes, there's Time Machine. Yes, there's airships flying up to islands in the sky. It's all there, but it's cohesive because it's a different timeline to Earth.
Is it alternate history?
Saying it's alternate history is kind of a stretch. I mean, right now we're in the reign of Queen Victoria II, so yeah. It's definitely, but it's not trying to be a specific.
It's history adjacent.
Yes,
gotcha.
Very history adjacent.
History adjacent. So, are you familiar? Osprey Publishing. They've got a miniatures game called In Her Majesty's Name. I think it's In Her Majesty's Name. And it's
very cool.
Yeah, right. It's all steampunky, and there's some miniature companies out there that do some really, really good stuff. Because I love role playing games. I love toy soldiers. And when you started talking about the world that you've built for your novellas, I immediately wanted to do Savage Worlds and just start doing Savage World and steampunk stuff.
Yeah, and that's the feel. So I wanted it to be rich and poignant. I want you to feel for the characters. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to take a lot of the things and turn it on their head. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with Firefly.
Oh yeah, no, I've watched the series many, many times and have ended friendships with people who don't like it.
Yeah. Likewise.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much you cannot touch children, and you cannot hate Firefly. I mean, there are rules.
So we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
But Firefly, they take it's just like Han Solo. I'm barely scraping by. I can barely put fuel in my spaceship, so I got to take this job whether it's legal or not. Right. I'm kind of turning that on their head. I'm trying to take a lot of those stereotypes, well, not stereotypes, but tropes, and flip it. These guys are wealthy. These guys are flying around, tooling around in this ship that's opulent and all the stuff, and they're doing it because they could fly away at any time. But they're morally bound by the stuff that they've witnessed to do the right thing.
No, that's fantastic. The idea of want for nothing, and what a liberating concept as a game master, right? Or as a writer, just not having to deal with all of those traditional obnoxious tropes of being destitute and having to make they don't have to do bad stuff. They don't need money. They don't have to do the bad stuff, but they're compelled to do the good stuff. I like that. I like that a lot.
Well, I'm trying to address issues like PTSD, trying to write villains where I mean, there's times I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning writing stuff from the villain's point of view. I'm like, I got to go to bed because he's starting to make sense to me. You know, it's not just a bad guy for being, you know, twirling his mustache and being a bad guy just because that's his job. Like,
right.
There's some compelling reasons why people do things. I've got this guy who's coping with his PTSD he's a weapons specialist, and he's painting toy trains to give to orphans. You know, that's his job, and he gets called out of that to go essentially save the world because of his skill set.
Role-playing games are, I mean, they're my drug of choice. Do you still do a lot of role-playing?
I do when I have time. I have a second going into third grader. I started to show my wife and I show him the basics of it. I tend to game wherever I travel, so I don't necessarily do the long-term campaigns anymore, but I do a ton of one-offs.
Do you do a lot of store-to-store outreach?
Local stores, yes. But about 2 years ago, I went on a week-long driving up the spine of the country, hitting a bunch of different game stores. I'd love to do that again. Yeah,
no, me too. I mean, when I quit working at Venture Market, my intention was to, you know, after Gamma, to immediately hit the road and start doing this kind of thing in person. But you know, a terrible global pandemic had different plans, and I had to pivot myself.
That was my problem too. I walked out. This is arguably the most successful Gamma I ever had in my entire gaming career.
Oh,
and then,
man!
Like as Gamma wound down, I was like, "Get the last plane out of Reno."
Yeah. Well, I won't bore you with it. I ended up, our flight got canceled, so my buddy and we drove home. We drove from Reno all the way to St. Louis without sleeping. I mean, well, I should say, let me rephrase that. I slept in the car while my buddy drove. My buddy's an entire...
And then vice versa.
Yeah, well, I didn't drive much. I did not drive much, but you know, he
That's
was...
a haul.
Yeah, he was in the zone, man. We were in the car for like 30 hours. That's crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah, but that's
I was lucky my flight was not canceled, but like I was watching the ones in back of me getting canceled.
Right. Well, and you're in Rhode Island, right?
No, I used to be in Rhode Island. I live in Kentucky.
Oh, you live? Oh, okay. All right. I saw the area code and made an assumption. So, where in Kentucky?
A town called Richmond. It's about half hour south of Lexington.
Okay. Lexington.
I'm about 8 hours from you.
Right. That's not bad at all.
No.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Not even 8, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think it's closer to like 6.
What events do you have on the schedule? What cons do you have scheduled that you're going to that have yet to be canceled?
None.
Wow.
If Origins doesn't cancel.
And that's it.
Yeah, that's it for the year. Alliance Open House is canceled. ACD would have been ACD last week.
Right.
Licensing Expo we were going to in Vegas canceled. Gen Con's obviously canceled. Board Game Geek is going to try and do a virtual thing, so we'll try and jump on that. PAX Unplugged is most like the rumor mill's churning, but I doubt it will happen. Spiel, which we're kind of going back and forth, like, do we bite the bullet and go to Spiel or not? Well, that choice was made for us. Other than Origins in the fall, I don't think, as soon as I hang up, I'll be like, oh, I forgot about that. But as far as I'm aware, that's it.
Have you seen any major production delays?
Yes.
Yeah. So what is, and I'm assuming that most of what you guys do is produced out of country?
Yep. We do a lot of our production in China, like most of the industry.
Sure.
Seen major delays both in the actual production, but also in just getting it out of the country. So we've got a game that's way behind schedule. It's called Dwarven Miner Reforged. We actually got to team up with Larry Elmore, which was awesome. And
like Dragonlance Larry Elmore?
Yeah, Dragonlance Larry Elmore.
Oh my God.
You go over your house, you drink bourbon with him, and that's then you talk about what he's going to paint next.
You've somehow found my bucket list.
Oh, really? Drinking bourbon with Larry?
I love bourbon, and I love Larry Elmore's art, and we could just sit there and be quiet. We don't even have to do anything. I'll just sit in silence. Maybe I'll
pull Larry's string. It's at least an hour before it goes back in. That's a great thing.
Well, he did. Speaking of pandemic, there's this great game by Eagle Games called Defenders of the Realm, which is basically fantasy.
Oh my gosh.
That's a great fucking game. And
it's awesome.
And Larry did all the art for it.
Yeah, well, all the art that was for it was legacy artwork, and then he painted the board.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, I'm literally, I've got my head turned. I'm looking at a game shoulder behind me, and I'm looking at my copy of Defenders of the Realm right now.
Yep, it's a great game. So, it was funny because we have a game called Dwarven Miner, and I wanted to do it with a legacy artist. And so we teamed up with Larry. He gave me access to his library for like the playing cards, but he also did the box cover for us, and he did the game board, and the game board is stunning, absolutely stunning. And so that was supposed to like be well out in the wild right now, and it's like we're still waiting to fulfill our Kickstarter stuff. Like stuff just cleared customs last week.
And what kind of
months behind?
Months, you said? Yeah.
It was supposed to be out in March. It was supposed to be fulfilled in March. Like the Kickstarter backers should have all gotten their copies and opened them like kids on Christmas in the beginning of March.
I have to say, I mean, all things considered, that's not a terrible delay.
It's not terrible. It was. I mean, obviously it's frustrating, and there's bigger issues in the world to worry about. I had to send one of the manufacturers a sample to say, hey, we want to make this game, but it's going to have different art, but most of the components are the same, so use this as a sample to kind of build your templates. And it took 2 months because it had to go through these provinces in China, and it was literally just sitting in this queue, and there was nobody to put it on a bike and wheel it across the city. It got pretty ugly. I realized that I tried to be very, very patient with that kind of stuff because I realized if it's that serious, then it's got to be that serious. And no game prototype is worth someone's life.
Of course not. Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge for everybody, and I am not a medical expert, I think the challenge for everybody is at what point does quarantine and self-isolation become worse than not having commerce? I don't know where that line is.
Oh gosh, I don't think anyone does.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, if the scientists and the economists of the world can't figure that out, then I'm not going to.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if they, I don't want to go down that tangent because I can't imagine anybody gives a fuck. But I'm looking at your website. Am I correct? Years ago, and I'm probably pulling this out of my ass, but was it you that does a lot of the art, or was it Grant?
Grant. I am not an artist. I can sketch something out to give an artist a good idea of something, but I am not an artist in any way, shape, or form.
All right. So I'm looking at some of the art cards here, and that the Awakening cards have a sort of a kitschy, not quite chibi look to them, but they've got a nice cartoony look. Who is that?
That's Grant Wilson.
Oh, so Grant did that. Okay, all right.
Yeah, Grant did all of that.
So
everything you're going to see on the website, except for Dwarven Miner Reforged, which I'm not even sure if it's up because we're trying to make sure our Kickstarter guys get fulfilled first.
Yeah, I do not see it on your website, sir.
Okay, to this point, everything I see on the website currently is art from Grant. Now that he's back in television production, we've reached out to some other very, very talented artists. It's going to be a mix-up moving forward.
I'm a very small business. I've only been working with a handful of artists, but one of the challenges that I have run into, and I probably because I'm not actually a big deal in producing stuff, but getting people to meet deadlines and communicate with artists is super challenging.
It can be. I've been fortunate in that respect. Grant and I grew up together, and like I said, we worked on that book together too. So it was actually very easy to communicate stuff to Grant because we knew each other so well. We knew each other's tastes. I'd be like, hey, I need a dwarven sorcerer who focuses on frost. And then like an hour later, I'm like, oh yeah, that's him. Just maybe make his wand bigger. It was very easy for that. Yeah. And I'm fortunate because then I worked with Larry Elmore. Obviously, he knows how to beat deadlines.
Yeah.
And my new main artist, his name's Eric Kempfer, and he's been phenomenal thus far. But beyond that, I also have the art department of Catalyst to tap, and they've got a lot of artists.
So envious. That's amazing. I've always been fascinated by. It's not groundbreaking, but by people who can do things that I cannot. But the idea that you can just put pen or pencil to paper and take vision and make it real, that is something that I've always envied.
especially being someone who likes to write and build games and stuff. Obviously, I'm creative enough to build this world and visualize it in my head, but I could never put it on paper except in Word or game format.
Right, and what a shitty prison that is that you have this concept, you can see it in your mind, but it's trapped there.
Yeah.
You know, it can only escape through specific avenues, and God, that pisses me off.
But at the flip side, I've become a professional game designer and hopefully professional writer.
Mike, I have to tell you, man, I really appreciate your time. I was super, super stoked when we ran into each other this year, a couple months ago, at the Gamma Expo, and you remembered me. I was very, very excited.
I was too, because we hung out a couple times at a couple gaming conventions several years back, and I always enjoyed our conversation.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully you and I will be able to get to do that soon. And with the world having reopened, I've actually been talking to some folks, and I'm not planning any road trips yet. But if I find myself in Kentucky in your neck of the woods, man, I would love to buy you a beer. Or
you can buy me a beer and I'll buy you a bourbon.
All right, perfect, fantastic. All right,
maybe we get Elmore to come up too.
Oh my God, I couldn't even. Well, so the whole reason I started this project is so I could meet Kenneth Hite. But if I could meet Larry Elmore, you know what? Yeah, Ken Hite might have to be put on the back burner.
Wow, poor Ken. I got to send him a card apologizing.
God, Jesus, he's a fucking genius. I don't think he likes me, but that's a story for a different time.
Ooh, that sounds like a bourbon story.
Right on. Well, Mike Richie, so we can find you at rather-games.com. We can order any of your games directly from your website. You've got the Downton Abbey Kickstarter is going to be coming out theoretically in a couple of months. It's going to be launching?
Correct.
Fantastic. Is there anything else that we want to plug, or anything else that, like Facebook page, that sort of stuff?
Frostfire Inc. is my writing Facebook page, or you can just go right to any of the places that you can get EPUBs and just put in Kingship and Odyssey and Aether, and that'll bring up everything. Mike
Richie, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And all things considered, I really do wish you the best of luck in your hobby profession, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. This has been a blast.
It's been a really good time. Thanks, Mike.